No skipping ahead. Here's the headline fact. The White House says Chinese companies are dodging U.S. tariffs by shipping their products through other countries first, so they don't look Chinese anymore by the time they hit American shores. Let me say that slower. A factory in China makes a product. Instead of shipping it straight to the U.S., where it would get slapped with a steep China-specific tariff, it sends the product to a different country first. That country slaps a new label on it, maybe adds a screw, repackages the box, does what's called light assembly. Then it gets called Made in Vietnam, or Made in Malaysia, or one of 40 other countries the report names. Then it comes into the US looking clean. Tariff avoided. Treasury shorted. That's it. That's the scam, according to the White House's own 25-page report, titled, and I promise I'm not making this title up, The Great Transshipment Scam. One more time, even simpler, it's laundering. Not money laundering. Made in China. Off a product so it can sneak past the tariff at the door, the same way you'd wash a serial number off a stolen watch before you tried to pawn it. And I want you to sit with the scale the report describes. This isn't a guy in a warehouse swapping a sticker. The report describes what it calls a whole global infrastructure built for this: production hubs, logistics platforms, free trade zones, bonded warehouses, processing corridors, re-export centers. That's not a loophole. That's an industry. An entire supply chain has grown up around the single purpose of making Chinese-made goods look like they came from somewhere else. Let me say that slower too, because it matters. This isn't one bad actor cutting corners. According to the government's own findings, it's a mature, built-out system, years in the making, designed from the ground up to beat the tariff. And I want to give you a picture, because transshipment is one of those words that sounds like it belongs in a textbook, not in your life. Imagine a jacket. It's cut, sewn, and finished in a factory outside Shenzhen. Under a straight shipping route, that jacket lands in Los Angeles, gets scanned by customs, gets tagged Made in China, and gets hit with whatever tariff applies to Chinese apparel that week. Under the transshipment route, that same jacket first sails to a port in, say, Malaysia. It sits in a bonded warehouse. Maybe someone sews on a different care label, or swaps the zipper, or repackages it in new boxes. On paper, it now originates, sails onto Los Angeles, gets scanned, gets waved through at a lower tariff, or no tariff at all, because as far as the paperwork is concerned, China never touched it. Same jacket. Same factory. Same worker who sewed it. Different documented birthplace. That's the entire scam, distilled into one hanger in one closet. The lawyer lens. Now let's put this in front of a jury, because that's what you are right now, you're the jury, and I'm walking you through the evidence, exhibit by exhibit. Question 1. Who benefits? Two parties, and I want you to notice they're not who you'd assume. First, Chinese exporters benefit, obviously, because they keep selling into the American market without eating the tariff. But second, and this is the part people skip past, American importers benefit too. Somebody in the US, a retailer, a distributor, sometimes a household name, is buying that relabeled product at a lower, tariff-free price and pocketing the difference, or passing a discount was never legally earned. This isn't a one-sided scam. It takes two to launder a shipping label, someone willing to relabel it, and someone willing to buy it without asking too many questions. Question 2. Who signed off on quantifying this? The report comes out of the White House Office of Trade and Manufacturing Policy, run by Peter Navarro, a name you should already know. He's the trade advisor who has spent years, across multiple rounds of trade fights, building the case that China games the system. He's the one who told reporters, him directly here, the Great Transshipment Scam has let communist China launder its exports. Now, as a lawyer, here's what I want you to notice about that language. Scam. Launder. Those aren't neutral economic terms, those are courtroom words. Navarro isn't writing a policy memo. He's writing a closing argument, and when the guy authoring the evidence is also the guy who's spent his career prosecuting the case, you don't throw the evidence out, but you do read it a little more carefully. You ask, is this a report or is this a brief? Question 3. What's the real motive? Look at the timing. This report drops weeks before Chinese President Xi Jinping is set to visit Washington in September, following Trump's own trip to Beijing back in May. You don't release a 25-page indictment of your negotiating partner's trade practices by accident right before he lands on your doorstep. That's not a coincidence, that's leverage. In my world, we call that laying your cards on the table before the settlement conference. You want the other side to know exactly what you've got before you sit down across from them. Question 4, and this is the one prosecutors love. How solid is the number, really? Here's the number that should make you raise an eyebrow. The White House's own report admits the estimate for what's actually being transshipped ranges from $34 billion all the way up to $303 billion. That's not a tight range, that's nearly a 10-times spread. When your own evidence has a margin of error that wide, that tells you something. And the report itself concedes the $19.26 billion figure is model-based, not observed losses, meaning nobody actually caught every dollar changing hands. They built an economic model, ran assumptions through it, and generated a range. That doesn't mean it's fake. Models are legitimate evidence. Economists use them, courts accept them. I've cross-examined expert witnesses who built their entire testimony on models just like this one. But it does mean this report is doing double duty. It's real economic analysis, and it's a negotiating document. At the same time, that's not hypocrisy on the White House's part. That's just how these documents get built. Question 5. Is China the only name on this indictment? Here's something the headlines are leaving out, and as your lawyer, I don't leave things out. Navarro himself said other countries, specifically India, could also be using transshipment to dodge tariffs. So even the author of this report is telling you, on the record, that China is the headline defendant, but not necessarily the only one in the courtroom. Keep that in your back pocket, because it matters for what comes next. Question 6. What's the enforcement mechanism, and does it actually have teeth? The report isn't just pointing fingers, it's rolling out tools. Customs and Border Protection has started a prototype program using artificial intelligence to flag suspicious transshipment patterns in real time. And here's the part with actual bite. Importers caught falsifying a product's origin can have tariffs applied retroactively for roughly a year. That means if you got caught today, the government could reach back 12 months and bill you for every shipment you tried to sneak through. That's not a slap on the wrist. That's the trade equivalent of a retroactive indictment. Question 7, and this is the one I'd hammer if I were cross-examining the report itself. Why release the raw estimate at all, instead of waiting for hard enforcement data? Think about how prosecutors normally build a case. You gather evidence quietly. You build your file. You don't hold a press conference before you've made an arrest, because you don't want the target changing behavior before you're ready to move. This report does the opposite. It's loud. It's public. It's got a title practically begging to be quoted on cable news. If the goal were purely to catch fraud, you'd expect quiet, targeted enforcement, audits, seizures, penalties handed down case by case. Instead, we got a 25-page public document with a range so wide it spans from $34 billion to $303 billion, released to reporters, timed weeks before a summit. That tells me the primary audience for this report isn't a customer, it's Beijing. And it's you. Connect the dots. Here's where it gets interesting. This didn't come out of nowhere. Back in June of this year, the administration issued Executive Order 14411, specifically targeting customs enforcement against transshipment fraud. This report is the receipts for that order. It's the White House building the record after the fact to justify the policy it already put in place. Any litigator will tell you, that's a classic move. You act first, then you commission the right to act. It's the difference between arresting someone and then building the case, versus building the case and then making the arrest. This administration did it in that order, enforcement first, evidence second. And look at what's already happened on the ground, because the numbers back up the theory. Direct Chinese exports to the U.S. hit a 16-year low last year, just $308.7 billion, way down. Meanwhile, exports from Mexico and Vietnam climbed during that same window. That's not China trading less with America. That's China's goods taking a detour. The administration already saw this coming, which is exactly why it slapped a 40% tariff specifically on transshipped goods coming through the Vietnam trade framework. In fact, at one point last year, Chinese exports to the U.S. dropped 43% year-over-year in a single month, while shipments to Vietnam and Indonesia spiked. That's not a coincidence. That's a paper trail. Now let's go back further, because this pattern has history, and history is exactly what a good closing argument leans on. The report itself points back to 2018, when Section 301 tariffs first hit China. In the years right after, 2019 and 2020, the direct U.S. trade deficit with China actually fell. Looked like the tariffs were working. But the report says that's exactly when Chinese exporters started routing goods through third countries in earnest. In other words, this isn't a new behavior triggered by this administration's tariffs. It's the same playbook, run twice, on two different tariff regimes, 6 years apart. That's not one incident. That's a pattern of conduct, and in my world, a pattern of conduct is exactly what you use to prove intent. Now connect that to the bigger picture happening right now. This is one piece of a much larger strategy from this administration. Tariffs first, negotiate second. We saw new duties, 10 to 12.5%, rolled out on 60 different trading partners just last month, including Canada, over alleged forced labor practices. We saw the Supreme Court strike down parts of the president's emergency tariff powers back in February, and instead of backing off, the administration simply rebuilt the tariff regime through other legal channels. Economists are already projecting these new tariffs could generate close to $950 billion over 10 years. This report fits that same playbook. Find the leak, quantify the leak, even loosely, and use the number as ammunition heading into the next fight. And folks, here's the part that should matter to you, sitting at home, not in a courtroom. If this enforcement actually works, if that AI detection tool at customs actually catches these relabeled shipments, that $19 to $26 billion doesn't just disappear into thin air, and it doesn't just land in the treasury with no consequences. It shows up somewhere else. And where it shows up, according to the report itself, is higher prices on electronics and plastics, the exact product categories where transshipment is most concentrated. So the win, here if there's one, comes the price tag attached to your next Amazon order, your next new laptop, your next replacement phone case. That's the full pattern, laid end to end. Tariffs create the incentive to launder origin labels. Laundering the labels creates the enforcement crackdown. The enforcement crackdown pulls in AI surveillance and retroactive penalties. And the cost of closing that loophole eventually rolls downhill, to the consumer. Around and around it goes, and it's been going since at least 2018. And here's one more thread I want to pull, because it's the one that ties everything together: credibility as currency. Every time this administration puts out a report like this one, it's not just informing the public, it's building a track record it can point back to later. We told you about transshipment in August. We told you the number was as high as $26 billion. We acted. That track record becomes its own kind of leverage, separate from the tariffs themselves. It lets the administration walk into the September meeting with Xi Jinping and say, in effect, we've already done the homework, we've already told the country, the number's already out there, now let's talk. That's not an accident of timing. That's a strategy that's been building for years, one report, one executive order, one tariff announcement at a time. Think about it like building a paper trail before a trial.